Claire Bennett tightened the strap of her carry-on bag as she moved quickly through the security checkpoint at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The scent of roasted coffee and airport antiseptic lingered in the air, but she barely noticed. Her mind was a blur of exhaustion and quiet urgency. She just wanted to go home. 2 weeks in France had felt like 2 months. What had started as a trip to visit her aunt, recently hospitalized, had become a draining cycle of hospital visits, awkward conversations in fractured French, and restless nights in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of Paris. Claire didn't regret coming. Family mattered. But now her body ached for the familiar. For quiet. For her own bed in New Jersey. She glanced at the reprinted boarding pass in her hand. The original had gotten smudged that morning in the rain, barely readable. A woman at the help desk had smiled, typed something quickly, and handed her a new one. C-17, she had said with a soft French accent. Don't worry. Very short walk. Claire didn't question it. Her mind wasn't sharp today. She hadn't slept well. She hadn't really eaten. She hadn't written a single word in over 2 weeks, not even in her journal. Something about hospitals had a way of draining her spirit dry. She reached gate C-17 and slowed, frowning slightly. It wasn't what she expected. There were no passengers. No gate agents calling final boarding. Just 2 attendants in sleek navy uniforms standing beside a frosted glass door. Behind them, the wall bore an unfamiliar logo, a stylized silver wolf on a dark blue field. Minimalist. Not the standard branding of a major airline. Claire looked again at the gate number. It matched her boarding pass. One of the attendants stepped forward. Miss Bennett. Claire blinked. Yes. He smiled warmly, professional to the last detail. Welcome aboard. We've been expecting you. She hesitated. Is this the flight to New York? Yes, ma'am. We'll take your bag. He didn't ask for ID. Didn't scan her pass. Before she could ask anything else, the other attendant had taken her backpack, and the door to the jet bridge slid open with a soft hiss. Everything moved too quickly. Claire followed. Her legs felt disconnected from her body. Maybe it was the jet lag. Maybe the quiet professionalism made her second-guess her doubts. Whatever it was, she stepped through the door, onto the carpeted walkway, and into the cabin. It wasn't an ordinary cabin. The air smelled faintly of lavender and leather. Cream-colored chairs lined the space, wider than any first-class seat she'd ever seen. A low wood-panel divider separated the lounge area from what looked like a private office space. Soft lighting bathed everything in gold. No overhead bins. No seat numbers. No boarding chaos. Claire stood frozen, her eyes wide. Please, sit wherever you like, a third attendant said gently, gesturing to the open lounge. We'll be departing shortly. Claire nodded slowly and took the nearest window seat. The leather molded perfectly to her back. Her fingers traced the armrest, hesitant. Something about this felt wrong. It was too quiet, too exclusive, too luxurious. Her breath caught. What if she had boarded the wrong flight? She reached for her phone, but before she could open the boarding app, the main door sealed behind her with a low, pressurized click. Too late. She exhaled shakily and told herself to stay calm. There had to be an explanation. Maybe this was an upgrade? Maybe the airline was compensating overbooked passengers with an executive flight? Or maybe that would be ridiculous. She was still turning over scenarios in her mind when a voice behind her made her sit up straighter. You're not Olivia. Claire turned. A man had entered the cabin from the front, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a slate-gray pullover and dark-tailored pants. He was holding a small tablet in one hand, but his eyes were fixed on her. Curious. Not angry. Not alarmed. Just confused. Sorry, Claire said. You're not Olivia Tan, he said again, more like a statement of fact than an accusation. I'm not, she said cautiously. Claire Bennett. There was a beat of silence. The man tilted his head. And what are you doing on my plane, Claire Bennett? She blinked. Plane. His lips twitched, not quite a smile. This aircraft is a private tech prototype. Flight 901. A direct test run to New York. You're not supposed to be here. Claire's mouth went dry. Her heart began to pound. I think there's been a mistake, she stammered. I was supposed to be on Airway International, Flight 671. Someone printed me a new boarding pass this morning. I didn't know. The man studied her. Then, with an exhale that sounded more amused than frustrated, he sat across from her. Well, he said, setting down his tablet, I suppose we'll figure this out in about 8 hours. Claire stared at him. I'm on the wrong plane. Definitely, he said. But it's not your fault. Seems like someone from my ground team made an error. She looked down at her hands, feeling the heat rise in her face. Can we turn around? He glanced toward the sealed cabin door, then shook his head. Too late. We're already cleared. We take off in 3 minutes. Claire slumped back in her seat. Oh my God. The man extended a hand, his expression oddly calm. I'm Adrian Wolf, he said. Welcome to Wolf Aerotech. Claire wasn't sure what surprised her more, the fact that she had accidentally boarded a billionaire's private aircraft, or that said billionaire was now sitting across from her, perfectly calm, as if this kind of thing happened all the time. Adrian Wolf leaned back in his seat, watching her with quiet curiosity. Claire, meanwhile, felt her body locking up like a system error. This wasn't just the wrong flight. It was the wrong universe. She smoothed her skirt with trembling hands. I'm so sorry. I swear, I didn't mean to. I thought this was Flight 671 to JFK. The gate was marked C-17N. He held up a hand, palm relaxed. It's all right. No one's accusing you of hijacking anything, he said, voice dry but not unkind. Our ground crew must have handed you a misprinted pass. You're not the first glitch in our beta system. Claire blinked. Your beta system? Adrian exhaled as if he'd already said too much. Wolf Aerotech is testing a new AI-operated fleet. Minimal crew, private routes, tighter security, optimized experience. This flight was supposed to be unmanned, except for me and a few execs. But the execs bailed, and Olivia, my assistant, missed the gate. Claire absorbed his words slowly. Then she frowned. So, you're not the pilot? Adrian let out a low chuckle. Gunno, I build things. I don't fly them. The plane is mostly automated, crew on board for backup. Think of it like Tesla but with wings. Oh. She looked out the window, at nothing. Just gray sky and clouds bleeding into more clouds. Then she turned back. I can sit somewhere else. If I'm invading your space, I can. You're not, he said simply. Besides, it's a long flight. Might be nice to have someone to talk to. Claire wasn't sure how to respond. The man was unreadable. Calm, contained, slightly amused. Like someone who had seen the world from so many angles, nothing surprised him anymore. Not even a tired woman landing in his cabin by accident. He opened a sleek, leather folder and pulled out a tablet, swiping it open with practiced ease. Claire watched him for a moment, then turned her eyes downward. Silence settled between them. It wasn't awkward, just quite. The hum of the engines was steady and soft. The cabin lights had dimmed slightly, casting a golden glow across the cream upholstery. Somewhere behind the divider, a steward was preparing something. The faint scent of rosemary and roasted something drifted through the air. Claire folded her hands in her lap. You don't seem angry, she said finally. Adrian glanced up. Should I be? I boarded the wrong plane. I could be a security risk. He gave her a look. Are you? Claire shook her head. No. Then I'm not angry. It was that simple. She studied him for another beat. Strong jawline. A faint crease between his brows, like he thought too often. There was something quiet behind his eyes. Something a little worn. A little tired. Not the kind that came from lack of sleep, but the kind that came from carrying too much, too long. I didn't even know who you were, she said. Even better. Adrian locked the tablet, set it aside, and leaned forward slightly. You want something to drink? Claire blinked. Like water? I was thinking wine. But water's fine too. She hesitated. Red if you have it. He nodded once and stood. A moment later, he returned with 2 glasses, deep burgundy swirling gently in crystal. Claire took hers with both hands, sipping carefully. It was smooth. Probably aged longer than her last relationship. "Thanks," she said. They sat there, two strangers, sipping wine in silence, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic. No flight attendants bustling down aisles. No babies crying. No middle-seat armrest wars. Just a billionaire, a literature professor, and a shared accident. "Claire," he said. She looked up. "What do you do?" She hesitated, then gave the answer she always gave when she wanted to sound normal. "I teach English literature at a community college." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "You say that like it's a bad thing." She smiled faintly. "It's not. It's just not very exciting. Not compared to flying AI-powered planes across oceans." He tilted his head. "Teaching people to think for themselves is a rare skill these days. I'd say that's more valuable than flying a machine." Claire blinked at that. She wasn't sure if he was being sincere, but something in his voice didn't sound like flattery. "You always this philosophical with accidental passengers?" He smirked. "Only the ones who order red wine." She laughed, soft, surprised at herself. And just like that, something shifted. The silence between them was no longer thick. It was comfortable. Claire hadn't realized how long she'd been talking. Somewhere between her first sip of wine and the moment the sky outside shifted from steel gray to velvet blue, her words had simply begun to unravel. Not in a frantic rush, but gently, like leaves floating downstream. She told him about her students. The boy who only read graphic novels. The girl who wrote poems on the back of grocery receipts. She told him how she loved books more than people sometimes. How teaching gave her structure, a reason to show up. And how lately, even that wasn't enough. Adrian hadn't said much. But he listened. He sat there, one leg crossed over the other, hands resting on the glass in front of him. His gaze never wandered. Not to his watch. Not to his tablet. Just on her. Steady. Intent. At some point, the wineglass in her hand had gone warm. She hadn't noticed. Neither had he. "So," she said at last, breaking the quiet, "now you know more about me than most of my coworkers." Adrian leaned back. His expression unreadable. But not cold. "I don't think your coworkers know how to listen," he replied. She tilted her head. "And you do." He didn't smile. Not quite. But his eyes softened. "I've built a life around people pretending they care what I say. It's rare to meet someone who doesn't care at all." Claire blinked. "Is that what you think this is? That I don't care? I think it's refreshing." She let out a quiet breath. Then looked down at her hands, fingers still curled around the empty glass. It was strange being here with him. Not just because he was clearly wealthy, powerful, used to being in control of things she couldn't even name. But because he didn't act like it. There were no power games. No charm turned on like a switch. He was quiet. Observant. Guarded, yes, but not unkind. "What about you?" she asked. "You know what I do. What's your day-to-day like?" He looked toward the window for a moment. The reflection of soft cabin lights glinted in the curve of the glass. "Depends on the day," he said. "That's not an answer." Adrian gave a small shrug. "Some days, I'm in meetings I don't want to be in. Some days, I'm fixing things no one else knows are broken. And some days, rare ones, I sit in silence and wonder what the hell I'm even building." Claire didn't respond right away. Then she said, "You sound like someone who's tired." He looked at her, his eyes meeting hers across the space between their seats. "I am." There was no defense in his voice. No pretense. Just truth, plain and unvarnished. Claire nodded slowly. "Me too." The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. She leaned her head back, gazing upward toward the ceiling. The lights were low now, a gentle amber wash that made the leather feel warmer somehow. "You ever think about disappearing?" she asked softly. Adrian didn't answer right away. Then, "Yes. All the time." Claire glanced over. "So why don't you?" He let out a breath, not quite a sigh. "Because I built too many things that depend on me. People. Projects. A legacy I didn't ask for." She nodded. She understood that more than he knew. My mom passed away 3 years ago, she said. Suddenly. A heart attack. No warning. Adrian's eyes flickered. I'm sorry. Claire gave a small, hollow smile. She was the reason I wrote. The reason I believed in stories. After she died, the words just stopped. Adrian watched her. He didn't interrupt. I still teach, she went on. Because it's safe. Predictable. But I haven't touched a blank page since the day I got that phone call. The weight of it hung there, not heavy, just present. Like fog that never fully lifts. Adrian leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Maybe, he said, the story isn't gone. Maybe it's just waiting for the right chapter to begin again. Claire looked at him. And for the first time since she'd stepped on this plane, something in her chest moved. Not quite hope. Not quite longing. But something warm. Something alive. Do you always talk like a fortune cookie? She asked, her voice lighter. That time, Adrian actually smiled. Not a smirk. Not a twitch. A real smile. Only on experimental aircrafts with uninvited literary passengers, he replied. Claire laughed, and it felt real. Outside, the sky had deepened to midnight. And inside, two strangers, still strangers, sat side by side. Not lost. Not found. But no longer entirely alone. Claire woke to stillness. Not the jarring quiet of a hospital hallway or the distant hum of an old apartment radiator. This was a different kind of silence, steady, intentional, warm. She blinked, adjusting to the dim cabin lights. At some point, the sky outside had turned indigo, flecked with the first hints of dawn. The plane flew steady, slicing across the Atlantic with barely a tremble. She sat up slowly, surprised to find a soft blanket draped over her shoulders. She didn't remember asking for one. Across the aisle, Adrian was still awake. He sat near the window, a tablet in hand, though the screen was black. He wasn't reading. Or working. Just thinking. You don't sleep much, do you? Claire asked softly. He looked up, startled, then shook his head. Not when I'm flying. Too much history. She tilted her head. Turbulence makes you nervous? No. Memory does. There was no need to ask more. The shift in his voice was enough. Claire wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. Do you want to talk about it? Adrian didn't answer at first. Then he placed the tablet aside and leaned back. My younger brother. His name was Leo. Claire said nothing, but her posture changed. A quiet openness that asked nothing and welcomed everything. He died 3 years ago. Small aircraft crash outside Nevada. It wasn't supposed to happen. The weather was fine. The maintenance logs were clear. But something failed. Something no one saw coming. Claire's chest tightened. He was supposed to be on a commercial flight that day, Adrian continued. But he changed it last minute. Wanted to get home faster. Private pilot. Smaller plane. He texted me before takeoff. He paused. That was the last thing he ever sent me. Just 2 words, see you. Claire didn't speak. Sometimes, silence is the only answer that matters. I built Wolf Aerotech because of him, Adrian said. I told myself I was creating safer ways to fly. Smarter systems. Machines that wouldn't forget. Wouldn't miscalculate. Wouldn't fail the people we love. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. And did it help? He looked at her. No. That word hung heavy in the air, heavier than the engines, heavier than the sky. But it gave me something to run toward, he added. Something to do instead of falling apart. Claire nodded slowly. I understand that. She didn't have to explain why. He already knew. Some losses were loud. Others hollow. Both left echoes you learn to walk around. I stopped writing after my mom died, she said quietly. I couldn't even look at a blank page. Like every word I might put down would feel false. Adrian looked at her with gentle steadiness. But you still teach, he said. Claire smiled faintly. Because teaching someone else how to find meaning is easier than looking for it yourself. They sat like that for a while, not needing to fill the air with anything else. Outside, the stars had begun to fade. Adrian finally stood and walked to the small counter behind the seating area. He returned with 2 mugs of something warm. Coffee, rich and aromatic, with just a hint of cinnamon. Claire accepted hers with both hands. It warmed her fingers immediately. "Did you always want to write?" he asked. She nodded. "Since I was 10. I used to sneak into the attic with a flashlight and a notebook. I'd write little stories about imaginary cities and missing stars and people who talked through windows." He smiled. "That sounds like someone who saw the world differently." "I did. Or at least I wanted to." She sipped the coffee, letting the heat settle in her chest. "There's a short story I started after my mom passed," she said. "Just a few pages. I called it The Girl in the Middle Seat. I never finished it." Adrian glanced at her. "What was it about?" Claire shrugged. "A woman who boards the wrong flight and ends up sitting between two people who change the way she sees herself. That's all I had. Just the idea." He smiled again. "Maybe this is the universe giving you a rewrite." Claire met his gaze. For a moment, she didn't look away. "Maybe," she said. The light outside the windows began to shift again, soft gold creeping up the edge of the clouds. They were getting closer to New York. But neither of them seemed in any rush to land. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into New York shortly. Estimated arrival time, 6:38 a.m. The weather is clear, visibility high. Please remain seated as we prepare for landing." Claire looked toward the window. The clouds had thinned, revealing the faint outlines of a waking city far below, glittering lights stretching like veins across the dark, sleepy earth. New York. Familiar and distant all at once. She shifted in her seat. Adrian hadn't spoken for several minutes. He'd returned to his corner of the cabin, coffee in hand, gaze unfocused. But something in his posture had changed, slightly more tense. Like the nearness of the ground was pulling him back into something heavy. Claire cleared her throat. "I suppose this is the part where we go back to our separate lives." He looked at her. His eyes were unreadable. "Maybe," he said. She smiled lightly, though there was something hollow at the edges of it. "This will make a great story, you know. The time I boarded the wrong plane and ended up talking life and grief with a billionaire." Adrian didn't laugh. "Not exactly." But his lips curved. "You think you'll write about it?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. If I can find the right words." He nodded. Then set his mug down. "Can I show you something?" Claire blinked. "Right now. Before we land." He stood and crossed to a sleek black panel near the front of the cabin. With a soft click, it opened to reveal a narrow drawer. From it he pulled out a worn leather notebook, edges frayed, cover cracked in places like old skin. He returned and placed it gently in her hands. Claire looked down. The initials, LW, were pressed into the corner. "Leo Wolf," Adrian said softly. She looked up at him. "He kept that journal for years," he continued. "Notes. Sketches. Fragments of ideas. I found it in his apartment after the crash. I still carry it with me. Every time I fly." Claire opened the first page. The handwriting was messy, urgent. Slanted words, half sentences, lists of inventions, quotes, dates. One page read, "Build things that matter. And if they break, build again." She felt a quiet ache move through her. "He sounds like he saw the world with wonder," she said. Adrian nodded. He did. He used to say, "People forget how incredible it is just to be in the sky. To see the world from above." Claire handed the notebook back gently. "Thank you," she said. They sat in silence for a while, not because there was nothing left to say, but because some moments asked for stillness instead of words. Then the plane gave a soft jolt. The first touch of turbulence. Claire gripped the armrest instinctively. Adrian noticed. "Don't worry," he said. "It's just air stretching its legs." She laughed quietly, her fingers relaxing. "You're good at metaphors." "I had good teachers." Claire turned to him, something steady in her eyes now. "After my mom died, I kept asking why. Not just why she left, but why anything matters if it can all disappear. I stopped writing because I was afraid that every story would end the same way, in loss." Adrian listened, his expression still. "But maybe that's not true," she said. Maybe some stories don't end. Maybe they just shift direction. He looked at her, and this time, something cracked open in his gaze. Something unguarded, something real. "I think," he said slowly, "you've already started writing again." Outside, the sky was warming. The city was rising to meet them. And yet, inside that small capsule of quiet and clouds, Claire felt like they were still suspended somewhere in between. Not quite strangers, not quite something else. Just two people, trying to find a soft place to land. The first rays of morning sunlight caught the edges of the airplane's wings as the private jet made its final descent into New York. The skyline unfolded beneath them, blurred by a thin veil of dawn mist. Claire leaned closer to the window, her heart a slow, uneven drumbeat in her chest. She should have felt relief. Home was minutes away. But she didn't feel like she was going home. Not really. She felt suspended. Somewhere between before and after. Between who she was 2 days ago and the person sitting in this cabin now. Adrian hadn't said much since their last exchange. But she could sense something shifting in him. Not withdrawal, no, it wasn't distance. It was focus. As if something had clicked into place behind his eyes and he was holding it close, waiting for the right moment to speak. Claire turned back toward him just as the wheels touched down. A soft jolt. A rush of reverse thrust. A city waiting. The cabin lights brightened. Adrian stood, adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, and glanced at her. "We'll taxi for a bit. My team's meeting us on a private tarmac." Claire nodded. She wasn't sure why, but her throat felt tight. She stood too, smoothing her shirt as if it made a difference. Her reflection caught in the window. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. She looked undone. But not in a bad way. Like something had been taken apart gently, to be rebuilt. The jet rolled to a smooth stop. Claire reached for her backpack, then paused. Do I just walk out and pretend this didn't happen?" Adrian studied her. "Is that what you want?" She didn't answer. A soft chime sounded, and the cabin door hissed open. Cool morning air swept in. On the tarmac, 2 dark SUVs waited beside a sleek black town car. A man in a suit stood near the base of the steps, clipboard in hand, already scanning the manifest. Claire took a breath and stepped toward the door. But just as she reached it, Adrian's voice stopped her. "Claire, wait." She turned. He was holding something, a thin envelope. Unmarked. "I wasn't sure whether to give this to you," he said. "But now, I think you deserve to know." Her brows furrowed. "What is it?" Adrian hesitated. "The truth." She took the envelope slowly and opened it. Inside was a printed report. Clean, sharp. Official. Wolf Aerotech letterhead at the top. A log entry. Notes from their AI system. Internal communications. An image. A still frame from the Paris terminal. Standing at the help desk. The attendant handing her a boarding pass. Only it wasn't a mistake. The woman behind the desk had a Wolf Aerotech ID badge. Claire's stomach dropped. "What is this?" Adrian stepped forward, his voice low. She wasn't supposed to be there. That desk isn't part of Wolf's contract with the airport. It's reserved for closed internal traffic. Which means someone intentionally rerouted me. He nodded. "Someone in my company." Claire looked back down at the image. "Why?" Adrian exhaled. "We don't know yet. I'm investigating. But whoever it was, they flagged your name through an internal prototype, something called Mirror. Mirror. It's complicated. It uses aggregated data to match behavioral profiles. They were running tests to pair real passengers with artificial routes. A ridiculous experimental thing that was never meant to go live." Claire stepped back, her voice sharp now. "So this wasn't fate. It wasn't some beautiful accident. It was a test." "No," Adrian said quickly. "It wasn't me. I didn't authorize this. When I saw you on board, I thought it was a fluke. But after you fell asleep, I pulled the records. That's how I found out." Claire's eyes were wet before she even realized it. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought I was just lost. Just drifting into something unexpected. But I was engineered into it." "No," he said again, more firmly now. "You weren't engineered. They may have manipulated a path. But every word you spoke, every moment we shared, none of that was forced. She looked away, jaw clenched. I'm sorry, Adrian said softly. I should have told you the moment I knew. Claire crossed her arms, holding herself. You waited until we landed. Because I didn't want to break something that felt. He stopped, swallowed, real. Silence fell between them. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. Claire stared at the tarmac. The vehicles. The blinking lights of the early morning airport. She could walk down those stairs and disappear. She could forget the flight. Forget the wine. Forget the quiet confessions at 30,000 feet. But she didn't move. Instead, she turned back toward him, her voice low. I don't care how advanced your AI is. No machine writes that kind of conversation. No algorithm makes me laugh like that. Or makes me remember what it felt like to want something again. Adrian's eyes flickered. Then stay. She shook her head. I need time. I understand. He stepped back. Gave her space. Didn't beg. And that, more than anything, made her believe him. Claire walked down the steps into the cold New York morning. And behind her, Adrian stayed at the door. Watching. Not chasing. Just waiting. Claire didn't go home. Not right away. She stood outside the terminal, watching the stream of black town cars and yellow cabs snake their way around the curb. The city was already awake, horns blaring, people shouting, luggage wheels dragging along cracked sidewalks. But inside her, everything was still. She clutched her backpack tighter to her shoulder and started walking. No destination. No plan. Just forward. She didn't want to cry. Not here. Not now. But every step away from the plane, from Adrian, from that floating cocoon of unexpected comfort, it chipped at her. The moment she reached the end of the sidewalk, she ducked into a quiet corner near a coffee stand and sat down on a metal bench. The cold stung. She didn't feel betrayed exactly. It wasn't even anger. It was something murkier. Disappointment. Plus, a breaking of something delicate she hadn't even realized she was holding. She pulled the envelope from her bag. The report Adrian gave her. The proof. She read it again. Not to understand it better. She already did. But to feel something sharp. To remind herself it hadn't been a dream. She remembered his voice as he said, none of it was forced. And God help her, she believed him. But belief didn't make the ache go away. A man brushed past her, mumbling something about spilled coffee. A baby cried in the distance. The world didn't pause just because her heart had. Claire looked up at the sky. It was brighter now. Fully morning. The kind of day her mother would have loved. Build something new, Claire, her mother's voice whispered in her mind. Even when something breaks. She closed her eyes. After a moment, she reached into her backpack and pulled out her old notebook. The one with folded corners and tea stains and nothing new inside it for almost 3 years. She flipped to a blank page. The pen hovered, then touched down. The woman had boarded the wrong plane. Or maybe, the plane had boarded the right woman. Claire blinked. The sentence sat there, quiet and strange. But alive. She turned the page and wrote another. He was quiet but not hollow. Lonely, but not alone. He carried too many ghosts to speak freely, but with her, he had tried. She stopped. The ache in her chest loosened. Just a little. She didn't know what the story would become. But she was writing again. And that mattered. After an hour, Claire stood and called a cab. Where to? The driver asked. She paused. Then said, Brooklyn Heights. Meanwhile, Adrian sat alone in the now empty cabin. The door was closed. The ground crew had finished their checks. The vehicles had driven off. The silence inside the plane was deeper than before. He stared at the empty seat where Claire had been. He replayed everything. Every word. Every look. Every second he hesitated when he should have spoken sooner. Adrian had known many kinds of failure. Business. Family. Even loss he couldn't control. But this felt personal. He pulled out his phone, stared at the screen, then put it away. Not yet. He opened Leo's journal again. This time he turned to the back. Tucked inside was a torn scrap of paper, something Leo had scribbled once and shoved between the pages. The right people will crash into your life by accident. Let them. Adrian leaned back in his seat, staring at the words. Then closed the book. Outside, the sun was rising higher. And somewhere across the city, Claire was walking back into her life, with a pen in her hand. 2 days passed. Claire returned to her apartment in Brooklyn Heights, a walk-up with crooked baseboards, squeaky floorboards, and a kitchen sink that never drained right. It had always felt temporary, like a space she borrowed between chapters of her life. Now it just felt quiet. The first morning back, she opened the windows wide. Let the city noise pour in. Sirens. Barking dogs. Distant jazz from the deli downstairs. She needed sound. Something to remind her she hadn't imagined everything. The report still sat on her coffee table. Folded once, unread since the day she landed. Claire didn't touch it, but she didn't throw it away either. Instead, she wrote. Half a notebook. Pages filled with scenes that didn't have endings. Characters who asked questions without answers. But she kept writing. Every night, she sat by the window with tea and let her hand move. Sometimes slowly, sometimes in a flood. The words weren't pretty yet, they were raw and uneven, but they were real. She didn't hear from Adrian. And she told herself that was good. It gave her space. Breathing room. Time to untangle what was real and what had only felt that way. But on the third morning, when she opened her door to grab the newspaper, something stopped her. A small package sat at her doorstep. No label. No return address. Just her name, handwritten, Claire, in familiar penmanship. She hesitated, then brought it inside. Inside the box was a single item. A first edition hardcover copy of A Movable Feast by Hemingway. The spine worn. The pages yellowed. She opened the cover and found a note inside. For the woman who forgot she had a story worth finishing. Claire stared at the note for a long time. Her fingers traced the embossed lettering on the front of the book. She remembered telling Adrian, somewhere over the Atlantic, that she used to underline sentences in that novel with her mother. That she believed books could teach you how to feel again. This wasn't just a gesture. It was a memory. And he'd been listening. She sat down. Let the weight of the book settle in her lap. And then, as if pulled by something gentle and invisible, she reached for her phone. Not to call him. Not yet. But to open her email. She typed a short message. Subject. Thank you. 2. ader.wolf@w-it.com. Body. I got the book. I'm still writing. That doesn't mean I'm ready. But it means I'm not gone. She hovered over send for a full minute. Then pressed it. And that was enough. Elsewhere in Manhattan, Adrian stared at the screen. The email was short, honest, unpolished. But it stopped him cold. He'd been in a boardroom just moments before, a pitch deck projected onto the wall, 3 executives arguing over margins. But now, all of that blurred into background noise. He closed his laptop. Stood up. I have to step out, he said, already walking to the door. He didn't wait for permission. Later that day, Claire wandered through Prospect Park with a notebook under her arm. The clouds were low, heavy with summer rain that hadn't fallen yet. Kids ran barefoot across the grass. A man played saxophone near a bench. The air smelled like lilacs and concrete. She sat beneath her favorite tree. The one she used to visit during her last semester of grad school when everything felt too loud. She opened her notebook. Began to write. She didn't hear him approach. Not until his voice broke softly through the breeze. You told me stories need silence to grow. I figured this was the quietest place I'd find you. Claire turned. Adrian stood just a few feet away, wearing no suit, no pretense, just a navy sweater, gray sneakers, and a look she hadn't seen before. Not apologetic. Not hopeful. Just sincere. She didn't get up. Didn't speak. He sat beside her slowly. Left a space between them. Enough for trust. Not too much for distance. I didn't expect a reply, he said. But I hoped. Claire closed her notebook. I didn't send it for you. I sent it for me. He nodded. I know. They sat in silence for a moment. The kind that asked nothing. That just existed. Finally, Adrian said, I found out who altered the terminal assignment. Claire looked over. A junior developer. He wasn't trying to trick anyone. He thought Mirror was just generating simulation data. He didn't know it was connecting to live systems. She blinked. So I a glitch? No, he said quietly. You were the reminder that even in a system designed to predict outcomes, something human can still happen. Claire looked at him carefully. And what outcome are you hoping for now? Adrian exhaled slowly. None. No pressure. No promises. I just wanted to say one thing and mean it. She waited. I'm glad you were on that plane. Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened her notebook again, wrote a single sentence, then turned it toward him. So am I. They didn't kiss. They didn't make a vow. They didn't even hold hands. They just sat beneath the gray clouds, between strangers and children and saxophone notes, and let the quiet wrap around them like a new beginning. They agreed on one thing. There would be no labels, no declarations, no assumptions, just moments, one at a time. Claire didn't ask what Adrian wanted from her, and Adrian didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, they met once a week, always somewhere quiet. Sometimes it was the bookstore near Union Square where Claire liked to browse second-hand poetry. Other times, it was the tiny noodle shop on Mulberry Street that Adrian said reminded him of college nights. They talked about the city, about books, about nothing and everything. One night, after 2 glasses of wine and an accidental overshare about how she used to collect postcards from cities she'd never visited, Claire looked at him and said, "Do you ever get scared of saying too much?" Adrian thought for a moment. "No," he said, "but I get scared of not saying it soon enough." Claire blinked. That was the closest they'd come to talking about them. By late October, the leaves had turned amber, that kind of impossible red that looks like fire when the sun hits it just right. Claire's apartment window overlooked a row of ginkgo trees. She watched them every morning with a cup of tea in hand and a pen between her fingers. Her writing had changed. She was still teaching part-time, still grading essays about metaphor and unreliable narrators. But after class, she'd head to a corner cafe and disappear into her own stories, stories that no longer tiptoed around grief. One piece, The Girl in the Middle Seat, had grown to nearly 30 pages. She hadn't told Adrian she was working on it. Not yet. Adrian was changing too. Though not everyone noticed. He'd stepped back from the spotlight. No more press conferences, no more aggressive expansion talks. His board hated it. "You've gone soft," one investor grumbled. But Adrian didn't care. He was still building. Still running a company that was shaping the future of aviation. But he also knew what that future needed. Conscience. Perspective. One evening after a long meeting, he texted Claire. "You free to walk? I need the world to slow down." She replied 10 minutes later. "Only if there's coffee." They met on the Brooklyn promenade. The wind had teeth that night, but neither of them mentioned it. Claire handed him a to-go cup. "Hazelnut." "You're welcome." He smiled. "You're a menace." They walked for nearly an hour, past joggers, tourists, and teenagers in beanies taking selfies against the Manhattan skyline. "Do you ever think," Adrian asked, "about what would have happened if you hadn't boarded the wrong plane?" Claire sipped her coffee. "I wouldn't have written again," she said softly. "Not for a long time." Adrian nodded. "I wouldn't have slowed down," he said. "I wouldn't have remembered that there's a difference between building something big and building something that matters." Claire stopped walking. They were standing near the edge of the promenade, the skyline glowing behind them. She turned to him. "I'm scared," she said. He didn't flinch. "Of what?" "That this doesn't survive gravity." Adrian's brows knit. "What do you mean?" Claire looked away. "We met in the sky, where everything felt weightless. But down here, where everything's complicated and messy, I don't know if it works." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It doesn't have to feel weightless to be real." Claire met his eyes. "And what if it falls apart?" Adrian smiled. "Then we write a better ending." A week later, Claire stood outside a small building in Soho. It was an old warehouse-turned-gallery. Inside, Students from a local creative writing program were reading pieces for a small audience. Friends, family, strangers curious enough to wander in off the street. Claire clutched a manila folder against her chest. Her name was on the list. Last slot of the night. Adrian hadn't said if he was coming. She hadn't asked. He'd only texted, "Tonight matters. You'll be brilliant." Claire stepped onto the tiny stage, cleared her throat, and opened her folder. "This is an excerpt from something I've been working on," she said. "It's called The Girl in the Middle Seat." And she read. Her voice was steady. Her hands barely shook. The story was quiet, honest. Not about airplanes, not really, but about the things we carry when we think no one's watching. About grief that doesn't leave when the plane lands. And the people who arrive in our lives like turbulence, sudden, shaking us awake. When she finished, the applause was soft but sincere. She stepped down, breathless. And there, standing near the back, hands in his coat pockets, was Adrian. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her like she had done something impossible. Claire smiled. She walked up to him, slow and certain. "You came." "Of course I did," he said. "I couldn't miss the moment you told the world how you found your way back." She looked at him for a long time. Then, finally, she said the thing she'd been holding in her chest since the morning she landed. "I'm glad it was you." And for the first time since they met, Adrian reached for her hand. Not as a question. Not as a beginning. But as a promise. Winter came early. By mid-November, the city was already wrapped in scarves and the scent of roasted chestnuts. Storefronts glimmered with lights. Strangers huddled closer on subway benches. And the air had that thin, sharp edge that whispered, "Hold tight to what matters." Claire stood at the window of her apartment, watching snow flurries fall sideways against the orange glow of street lamps. A mug of chamomile tea steamed in her hands, but she hadn't touched it. Her thoughts were elsewhere. Earlier that day, she'd received an email. From a small literary magazine based out of Portland. They wanted to publish her piece, The Girl in the Middle Seat. It wasn't a big publication. It didn't pay. But it was real. Claire had read the message twice, then sat down quietly on the edge of her couch and cried. Not the loud kind. Just soft, stunned tears. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Later that night, Adrian arrived. He didn't knock anymore. He just texted, "Outside." And she buzzed him in without hesitation. He brought dinner, Thai takeout and an overpriced slice of chocolate cake from a bakery in the West Village. They ate sitting cross-legged on the floor, her cat weaving between their legs like he belonged there. "Tell me," Adrian said, between bites of pad thai. "What does it feel like?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Hearing yes. From someone who didn't know you before." She set her fork down. "It feels terrifying," she admitted. "Because now I don't have the excuse that no one cared." Adrian smiled. "So you're telling me success is scarier than rejection?" She shrugged. "Sometimes. But I'll take it." After dinner, they sat quietly. Claire rested her head on Adrian's shoulder. His arm wrapped around her without a word. And they stayed that way as the city breathed outside. After a long pause, she said, "You know, I wasn't supposed to be on that plane." Adrian looked down at her, amused. "I'm aware." She smiled. "I know. But I mean, I wasn't supposed to be seen. Heard. I was surviving. Not living. The flight, all of it, it was just supposed to be an accident." He didn't say anything at first. Then, maybe it was. Claire lifted her head, confused. "But maybe that's not a bad thing," he said. "Not all accidents are mistakes. Some are invitations. Tears. Open doors." She stared at him. "Are you trying to write poetry now?" He smirked. "I've been hanging around a writer. It's contagious." They laughed. But then something shifted. Claire stood and crossed the room. She opened a drawer, pulled out the envelope Adrian had given her after they landed, the report, the glitch, the thing that had broken the illusion. She handed it to him. "I've been keeping it," she said. "Not because I needed proof, but because I wasn't sure if I trusted myself to let go of the story I'd told myself about how we met." Adrian looked at the envelope in his hands. And now? She took a breath. Now I want to start over. He looked up. With us? No, she said, her voice soft. With me. She reached for the envelope and tossed it into the fireplace. They watched the flame catch the corner of the paper, curl it inward, turn it black, then to ash. The room went quiet again. Not empty, just still. After a while, Adrian said, "What now?" Claire turned toward him. "I go to Portland next month. The magazine's hosting a reading." He raised an eyebrow. "Can I come?" She smiled. "You want to hear the story again?" "No," he said. "I just want to be there when you tell it." 1 month later, the bookstore in Portland smelled like old pages and peppermint. Folding chairs had been set up between the shelves, and a small crowd gathered near the back, clutching cups of cider. Claire stepped up to the mic. Her palms were sweating. Her knees felt like paper. But her voice, steady. "This piece," she began, "started as a way to make sense of something that didn't make sense at all. I thought I was just trying to get home. But instead, I landed somewhere I didn't expect. And someone saw me there. For real." She paused. "Sometimes the flight path changes. Sometimes you board the wrong plane, and it takes you exactly where you need to go." She read the final lines of her story. And in the audience, Adrian listened. Not as a CEO. Not as the man behind the accident. But as someone who had once been drifting too. Until someone like her landed beside him. The snow had thickened in Brooklyn. Not the light, flurried kind that disappeared on contact, but real snow, heavy, quiet, grounding. Claire walked home from the subway, boots crunching over the sidewalk. The sky above was a soft gray curtain. And for once, she wasn't in a hurry. In her bag was a signed contributor's copy of the literary magazine. She kept touching it like it might disappear. When she reached her apartment, she didn't go inside right away. She stood on the stoop, looking up at her windows, lights glowing warm behind the glass, and thought, this used to be a waiting room. Now it's mine. Claire had lived here for almost 5 years. But it wasn't until now that it felt like a place she'd chosen to stay. She went inside. The air smelled like cinnamon and pine, a candle flickering on the windowsill. Her cat meowed once, sleepily, from the armchair and then curled back into his nap. Claire set down her bag, took off her coat, walked slowly into the kitchen and poured a glass of wine. And then, as if her body knew before her mind did, she opened the window. The air was freezing, but she didn't close it. She stood there, letting the wind hit her face, letting the snow brush the tips of her fingers on the sill. She closed her eyes and breathed. There had been so many versions of herself that she didn't recognize anymore. The girl who boarded the wrong plane. The woman who couldn't write. The daughter who didn't know how to grieve out loud. She was still all of them, but also something else. Something more whole. The buzzer rang. Claire smiled before she even moved. She didn't ask who it was. She just pressed the button and waited. A minute later, Adrian stepped through the door, brushing snow off his coat. He looked different lately. Not because of his clothes or hair or expression, but because of how quiet he'd become. Not withdrawn. Just present. He handed her a small brown bag. She peeked inside and laughed. "Gingerbread from that overpriced place you said you hated? They wore me down." She leaned against the counter. "I thought you were out of town. Just got back." The pause. "I couldn't wait." Claire tilted her head. "For what?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. This time, no company logo. No security seal. Just her name. In his handwriting. She opened it. Inside was a boarding pass. Issued by Wolf Erotic. New York to Lisbon. Date, 2 weeks from now. She looked up. "I didn't book it," he said quickly. "It's not a trick. I just wanted you to have it. In case you wanted to start a new story. Somewhere else. With someone." Claire stared at the ticket. "Why Lisbon?" He shrugged. "You said you always wanted to write in a cafe there. That the light on the tiles looked like poetry." She laughed softly. "You remember everything." He nodded. "But," he added, "only if you want. If not, I'll still be here." Claire looked back down at the pass. Then she walked to the fireplace, where a stack of journals sat beside a matchbox. She lit a match. Then, gently, held the edge of the boarding pass near the flame. Adrian's eyes widened. "What are you?" But she didn't drop it in. She only let the fire kiss the corner, enough to curl the paper slightly, mark it. Then she blew it out and tucked it inside the first journal. "I don't need a ticket to know I'm already on a new path," she said. "But I'll keep it, just in case." Adrian stepped forward, closer. "I didn't fall for the girl on the plane," he said. "I fell for the woman who got off it and kept walking anyway." Claire felt her throat tighten. She stepped into his arms. Not because she needed to be caught, but because she finally wanted to stand still, with someone who saw the storms and stayed anyway. They didn't kiss right away. They just held each other. Two people who had stopped drifting. Much later that night, Claire sat at her desk, window cracked open, snow still falling. She opened her notebook, wrote one last sentence. She was just trying to get home. But she hadn't realized home was never a place. It was the moment someone met her there and stayed. She put the pen down, closed the book, and for the first time in years, she turned out the light without fear. Spring came slowly that year. The kind of spring you had to lean into, where trees hesitated before blooming and mornings still needed a coat. But it came anyway, as if the city, like everyone else, was relearning how to begin again. Claire sat outside her favorite cafe on the corner of Pine and 4th, a tiny table tucked between a cracked brick wall and a street lamp. Her journal was open, her coffee half full, and her eyes drifting. Across from her, Adrian sat reading a novel, the kind with too many footnotes and no real plot. She teased him for it, but secretly loved that he read the same passage twice just to feel the rhythm of the words. They didn't speak. Not because there was nothing to say, but because sometimes silence was its own kind of language. Claire had submitted another short story that morning. Adrian had signed off on a mentorship program for first-generation engineers at Wolf Aerotech. Small things, real things. They didn't need big milestones anymore. Their flight had already happened. Now it was about how to live on the ground. Later that day, Claire walked alone through Prospect Park. The cherry blossoms had started to bloom, hesitant little bursts of pink brushing against gray sky. She thought of her mother then. How she used to say, "The best kind of beauty sneaks up on you." She smiled at that. As she passed the bench near the pond, the one she used to sit on during the loneliest months, she noticed someone had carved a sentence into the wood. Said, "You made it." Claire ran her fingers over the letters. Simple, unassuming, but true. She had. That evening, she and Adrian made dinner together in her apartment. Not takeout, not fancy. Just pasta and roasted vegetables and too much garlic bread. They moved easily around each other, like they'd done it 100 times. At one point he reached around her to grab a spoon, and she caught his hand. "I never told you," she said, "what I was thinking the moment I realized I was on the wrong plane." He looked at her. She smiled. "I thought, of course, this is how it ends. I miss a flight, and my whole life stays small." He waited. "But it didn't end," she continued. "It started. Not because of the plane, but because someone looked at me and didn't look away." Adrian said nothing. He just reached for her hand again. And they stood there for a long time. Two people in a kitchen filled with the smell of burnt bread and too much love to name. 1 year later. The bookstore in Lisbon was older than the city itself, or at least, that's how it felt. Stone floors. Narrow staircases. Dusty shelves. Light spilling in through windows that looked out onto a street full of scooters and wind. Claire stood at the center of the room. A small group of readers circled around her, a mix of languages and accents and notebook-carrying strangers. She was there to give a workshop, her first abroad. When she asked the group to write about a moment that changed everything, someone raised their hand. "What if it wasn't a big moment?" the girl asked. Claire smiled. "Then it's probably the right one." She paused, then added, "Big moments rarely arrive with a sign. Sometimes they look like missed flights and middle seats, or conversations that don't begin the way they should. Sometimes the moment doesn't look like anything at all until you survive it and look back The girl wrote that down. So did someone else. After the session, Claire stepped outside. The breeze smelled like sea salt and coffee beans. The sun was warm on her face. A text pinged. From Adrian. Don't forget dinner with Leo's sister tomorrow. She says she finally believes I exist. Claire laughed. Tell her I said you're only half real. She slipped the phone into her bag. And for a long moment, she just stood there. Alive. At peace. And far away, in an office full of maps and monitors. A new developer was testing an update to the system that had once accidentally rerouted a woman's life. They were trying to make the program more perfect. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't code, was this. Not all wrong turns are errors. Some are invitations. Some are love stories disguised as glitches, as delays, as missed gates and strange coincidences. The program would get better, more precise. But no algorithm would ever predict what happened when she boarded the wrong plane and found the right beginning.